My husband went to a bar with his ex behind my back. I never thought I'd find myself in such a situation. My life seemed perfect, at least from the outside. I had a loving husband, a cozy apartment, a job I adored, and a group of friends we'd often hang out with in the evenings. It felt like the picture-perfect image of marital bliss. But one evening shattered that illusion like a house of cards. It all started on an ordinary Friday night. My husband said he was staying late at work, but later I found out he had other plans. I got a message from a mutual friend. "You won't believe what he did." At first, I didn't understand what she meant. Then she sent me a photo. In the picture, they were standing in a bar, holding hands. My husband and his ex. The very woman I'd heard countless stories about, the one he once described as, "She was my first love, but it's over." My heart clenched, my breathing grew sharp. I tried to find an excuse. Maybe it was a work meeting. Maybe they just ran into each other and decided to catch up. But the look in their eyes was too intimate. They were sitting close, sipping cocktails, laughing. A mix of anger and despair surged within me. I didn't know what to do, where to look, or who to call. My first impulse was to text him, "What are you doing?" But I stopped myself. I wanted to see his reaction. I wanted to hear his explanation before jumping to conclusions. When he came home late that night, his gaze was unusually calm, almost indifferent. "Did you see me tonight?" he asked. I nodded silently, clutching my phone. "Well, so what?" he said, as if it were the most ordinary thing in the world. I couldn't believe my ears. "So what?" I repeated, my voice trembling despite my efforts to stay composed. He sat beside me, placed a hand on my knee, and said, "She just wanted to meet up. It was nothing." But his eyes betrayed something else. I knew it. I saw what he was trying to hide. And that's when I realized this wasn't just a meeting. It was intentional, an attempt to hurt me, to show he could disrupt our life for the sake of his pride. That night was sleepless. I lay in the dark, trying to figure out what to do next. How could I live with someone who did this? How could I trust someone who seemed to take pleasure in causing me pain? The next day, I decided to take a different approach. No breaking down, no shouting, no accusing, just observing and understanding what drove him. That's how my descent into a world of manipulation and psychological games began, a game my husband had started playing with me. The next few days were a blur. Every message from him, every word, felt like a potential trap. I tried not to show my emotions to friends, colleagues, or family, but inside, a storm was brewing with each passing hour. Suddenly, my husband became overly attentive. Flowers, compliments, gentle touches. At first glance, it seemed like the perfect reconciliation. But I knew this wasn't sincerity. It was a game, and I was a pawn on his chessboard. I started closely observing his behavior. I checked his phone when he left it nearby. Snooping wasn't something I was proud of, but I needed the truth. And the truth began to surface. In one message, I found a link to the bar where they'd met. He'd written, "See you here next week," and I realized it wasn't a chance encounter. It was planned. I recalled every detail of their past interactions. How often he mentioned her, how he'd sometimes casually compare me to her. Suddenly, it became clear. This wasn't just a meeting. It was his way of unleashing old emotions and showing me he still held control. I decided to act differently. No accusations, no scenes. I resolved to gather evidence, understand his motives, and maybe even use them to my advantage. The following days were spent studying his social media, call history, and the smallest hints in our conversations. It became clearer. He was trying to provoke me, make me jealous, make me doubt myself. One evening, he came home with an unusual glint in his eyes. I asked, "Were you with her again?" He laughed as if it were a joke. "Seriously, it was just a friendly meetup." But I knew it was manipulation. His eyes said more than his words. I realized he was enjoying my reactions. I started planning my next move. I needed to expose him, to understand why he was doing this. I invited a friend over for dinner and told her what had happened. She was shocked but supportive. "Don't rush to conclusions," Gather evidence first. Thus began my operation: quiet observation, fact-gathering, and analyzing his behavior. And here's what I realized. He wasn't acting this way just for jealousy or old feelings. It was a strategy of control, a test of my reactions, a game to measure how docile and compliant I was, how much I'd tolerate. The next day, I arranged a casual meetup with his friends. I acted calm and unfazed, but watched my husband's reactions. He was nervous, interrupting me, trying to divert attention. That's when I understood. His real goal wasn't his ex, it was my confidence and emotional state. I started keeping a diary, noting every step, every odd message, every hint of a meeting with her. With each day, it became clearer. He wasn't trying to go back to her. He was playing with me. But the game took an unexpected turn. One evening, I noticed he stayed at the bar much longer than usual. I decided to act. I went there unannounced to see for myself. The bar was packed, music blaring, laughter and chatter blending into a cacophony. And there they were, him and her, not just talking. They looked comfortable, close, almost like a couple. In that moment, I felt a mix of rage, fear, and resolve. I knew I couldn't let him manipulate me any longer. I had to act. I took a deep breath and approached them. He saw me first, his smile turning to surprise. She looked up too. Silence stretched for seconds that felt like eternity. I looked at him and said calmly but firmly, "What are you doing here?" He tried to smile, to say something, but I cut him off. "You're playing with me, and I want to know why." He faltered, his gaze darting, words stuck in his throat. In that moment, I realized he hadn't expected me to react with confidence and resolve instead of fear or tears. That evening was a turning point. I understood the game was changing its rules. Now that I knew he was trying to control me through jealousy and provocation, I could act strategically, not emotionally. Thus began a new chapter in our story. A chapter where every step and decision became a battle for respect, honesty, and my own dignity. After that night in the bar, I felt I could no longer be just an observer. I knew my husband was a master manipulator, testing my emotional resilience, my reactions, my tolerance. But I also realized, if I wanted to survive this game and regain control of my life, I had to stop being a pawn and become a player. The next day, I took action. My first step was building a network of information. I reached out to our friends, to people he often met after work. At first, it wasn't easy. Most wanted to stay neutral. But a few close friends had noticed his odd behavior, his constant mentions of his ex, the hints he dropped as if testing my reactions. Piecing together these fragments, I began to see the full picture. Every step, every gesture, every word from him started forming a pattern. And it became clear. He wasn't just meeting his ex to spark jealousy. It was a deliberate strategy, a psychological game where my confidence and trust were the stakes. But the game quickly took on new dimensions. He noticed I was keeping a diary and tracking his actions. He became more cautious, but also bolder. He knew I was catching on to his intentions, and it irritated him. One evening, he invited me to dinner at the same restaurant where we'd celebrated our first anniversary. At first glance, it seemed like a reconciliation attempt, but I knew it was another move in his game. Sitting across from him, I tried to read his eyes. He smiled, said sweet things, but something in his demeanor gave him away. A slight nervousness, quick hand movements, uncertainty in his pauses. I knew he was hiding something. "You're still mad about last Friday?" he asked, leaning slightly forward. "I'm not mad. I'm observing," I replied calmly, keeping my tone steady. He froze for a moment, as if trying to gauge how much I knew. That's when I realized the game was no longer one-sided. I could influence him, steer events, and direct the tension where I wanted. The following weeks were a true test. I began subtly provoking him into revealing more, asking leading questions about his meetings, his ex, and why he was doing this. Sometimes he answered evasively, sometimes with irritation. But most importantly, I saw his emotions, his fear of losing control. One evening, he came home later than usual. I was waiting in the living room, phone at the ready. He walked in, smiling, but there was a shadow of unease in his eyes. "Have you been checking on me?" he asked quietly. "I'm observing," I repeated with a faint smile. Then something unexpected happened. He sat beside me, sighed heavily, and said, "I didn't expect you to figure out I was playing a game so quickly." That moment was pivotal. For the first time, we openly acknowledged that our actions weren't just emotional outbursts, but deliberate psychological maneuvers. And in that admission, I saw an opportunity. The game could become honest if we both recognized our motives and fears. The next day, I arranged a chance meeting with his ex. In reality, it was carefully planned. I wanted to see how they interacted, how she reacted to me. She was calm, almost friendly, but I caught a flicker of unease in her eyes. She clearly knew I was aware. My husband tensed when he saw us together. His usual confidence and control wavered. I felt powerful watching his expression shift. In that moment, I realized we'd reached a new level. The game had turned into a duel, where the stakes weren't jealousy or love but respect and trust. I decided to act even more decisively. I began planning my moves, carefully choosing moments to test his true intentions. Sometimes it was harmless provocations, sometimes questions about the past, sometimes hints about the future. I recorded and analyzed every step, preparing for the next. And then, a few days later, he broke. He admitted that his meeting with his ex wasn't a coincidence or a friendly catch-up. He'd done it to test me, my emotions, to see if I was still under control. His words hit like a blow, but with them came relief. He'd admitted his motives. The game was now transparent, the rules clear. Now it was up to me. This stage of the story was a major victory for me. I realized I could stay composed, see through manipulations, and respond with cold strategy rather than emotional impulsiveness. Most importantly, I understood I could reclaim control over my life and our relationship. But this was only the beginning. The next part of the game promised to be even more complex, with unexpected twists, the involvement of friends, family, and perhaps unlikely allies. The days following his confession felt like a chess match. Every word, every glance, every little detail in his behavior mattered. I watched him, no longer as a victim of manipulation, but as a strategist controlling the game. One evening, we agreed to meet our mutual friends at the same bar where it all began. It was supposed to be a casual get-together, but I knew he might turn it into another psychological move. I prepared accordingly. Before the meetup, I spoke privately with a few friends. I wanted to understand how they saw the situation, whose side they were on, and who might unwittingly become a player in the game. To my surprise, several friends had long noticed his manipulations but hadn't intervened, fearing conflict. When we entered the bar, I immediately caught his wary glance. He sensed my preparation. We sat at the table, engaging in casual conversation, but I was focused on his every move. Then something unexpected happened. His ex showed up at the bar with a group of friends, not the one he'd met before, but someone else entirely, there by pure chance. I saw his face change. He was nervous, his smile strained, struggling to maintain control. I knew things were now beyond his grasp. I seized the moment. I turned to him calmly and said, "Want to explain what this is all about?" He faltered, words catching in his throat. I watched his usual confidence crumble. That's when I realized his power lasted only as long as I let him control my emotions. As we sat at the table, the ex, an unwitting bystander, became an ally. She asked why we seemed so tense, forcing him to reveal more than he intended. He said, "I wanted to test her to see how she'd react to my actions, but I didn't expect her to be so calm and strategic." That confession hit hard, but not for me, for him. I felt relief and confidence. The game was now open, the rules clear, and I knew his true motives. The next few days, we continued talking. I asked questions, gently pushing him toward honesty. He admitted the meeting with his ex wasn't about love, but about ensuring I wouldn't break under pressure. I realized much of our relationship had been built on such tests, manipulations, and psychological games. But now, everything had changed. I knew I could control my reactions, my emotions, my actions. In that moment, I made a crucial decision. I wasn't going to seek revenge or ruin his life. I was going to reclaim my dignity, restore my confidence, and set clear boundaries in our relationship. We had a long, honest conversation. I explained how his actions hurt me and that I wouldn't allow further manipulation. He listened silently, and I saw respect and understanding in his eyes. The culmination of this story was the realization that relationships aren't about control but partnership, where trust and honesty outweigh games and tests. We decided to rethink our interactions, to build new rules free of manipulation. This experience taught me a lesson. Even when someone tries to hurt, test, or manipulate you, strength lies with the one who knows their boundaries, controls their emotions, and acts strategically, not impulsively. The story didn't end in drama or destruction, but in an inner victory and a reevaluation of our relationship, where every step was a lesson and every emotion a tool for understanding myself and others. After that candid talk in the bar, life seemed to slow down, but the tension didn't fully dissipate. I felt a mix of relief and caution. I knew my husband had admitted his motives, but the real question remained: could we truly rebuild our relationship? The first few days after that conversation, he tried to be as open and honest as possible. He acknowledged how hurtful his actions had been, how much pain he'd caused, and how important it was to rebuild our relationship on trust. I, in turn, observed him. Every word, every reaction became a test, not of him, but of me. I analyzed his actions to ensure his words matched his deeds. A key moment came during a meetup with friends who'd witnessed the tense scene in the bar. I decided to be honest and open, sharing what had happened and how we were working through it. Their response surprised me. They supported me, but also respected my husband for admitting his mistakes. That's when I realized the strength of a relationship isn't about who's right or wrong, but about people's ability to own their mistakes and work on them. However, the story couldn't avoid the ex's involvement. She called, trying to explain herself, but I remained calm. She realized her role in this game was incidental and insignificant, and I made it clear we didn't want her involved in our relationship anymore. Over the next few weeks, things gradually returned to normal. My husband changed his behavior, becoming more attentive and honest. I learned to trust him again, not blindly, but with a clear understanding of his motives and boundaries. The most important lesson I took from this was about the power of personal boundaries and inner confidence. Manipulations, jealousy, and control attempts can be painful, but they can't destroy someone who knows their worth, who can observe and act strategically. Our relationship after this ordeal became different. We learned to talk about feelings, fears, and past mistakes without hiding anything. We stopped playing psychological games, and though the journey was tough, I'm grateful for the lessons and for the fact that we emerged from this crisis stronger and more honest with each other. This story wasn't just about betrayal and jealousy, but about the importance of preserving dignity, controlling emotions, and building relationships based on honesty, not games or manipulation. In the end, I realized that sometimes the most painful trials show us how strong we are and how capable we are of changing alongside others.